Oh, hello. Fancy seeing you here on a Monday morning, but glad you could join us. Welcome to Monday Morning Coffee with Inside the Firm. Each week we will be interviewing local, regional, and national business leaders to give you an inside peek into how they lead their businesses to success in an ever-competitive business climate. So pour yourself a hot cup and enjoy the show.
Welcome to Monday Morning Coffee, edition of Inside the Firm. I'm your host, Al Gore. I'm here with Jim Cantrell. Jim is the founder of several entrepreneurial startups, including Vector Launch, Strat Space, and Vintage Exotics Competition Engineering. That's probably why we're here.
Right.
He was on the founding team of Moon Express, a private company attempting to land on the lunar surface, and the founding team of SpaceX, where he was the first VP of Business Development. How's it going, Jim?
That's great.
That was such a short introduction of what has been a long career for you.
I'm old.
I mean, the things that you've done, particularly in the space industry, everything from launching a solar sail from a nuclear sub, a Russian nuclear sub.
Right. One of the more unusual things I've done.
Yeah. To meeting Carl Sagan, to working with Elon Musk, to starting all these companies, to honestly help inspire the entrepreneurial space, but also being a part of it at the same time.
Yeah.
So we probably can't go into everything, but let's start at where are we right now?
Yeah.
What are you doing today?
This is an unusual place to have this kind of a podcast. We're at La Junta Raceway in La Junta, Colorado, and it's a SCCA race, which is the Sports Car Club of America, and I'm competing in the T2 class for the championship that happens in October. So we've got to do a number of races and to compete and qualify, and so I'm driving a Porsche 997 in this particular class.
Are you mainly an old school car guy, a new car guy?
You know, if it goes fast and has wheels, I like it.
Yeah.
I've got everything from brand new stuff to really old stuff, and we race vintage cars. I've got one that's a 64 Corvette that we run in the Monterey Historics every year, which is, arguably the biggest historic race in the world, to this Porsche, which is pretty new. So, and the stuff I drive on the streets, most of it's new because it's more reliable.
Yeah. If you were going to Frankenstein a vehicle together, what kind of features would you put together in a car?
If it's a race car, it's one thing. If it's a street car, it's another. So, frankly, for me, a street car, the best thing in the world is a truck. So,
yeah.
And I drive a 1-ton Dodge truck, so that's really kind of where I'm at. I love diesels, and they're so efficient. They're good at pulling, and they just get great gas mileage. So in fact, I've got an old Jeep. It's a 2006 Wrangler that I'm going to actually put a Cummins diesel in it just because.
Yep.
So, but if it were a race car, it's a different story. You want everything to be light. You want it to be reliable. Depends on how you race it, right? If it's a road race car, some of them are sprint races that go 20, 30 minutes. Sometimes they're, 24-hour cars. So if you want to survive 24 hours, you got to have reliability. And so sometimes you balance that weight out with the performance.
Do you have your eye on any future cars coming out or anything you want to get that you don't have?
I'm dying to get one of these Amg Gt4 race cars. So they look kind of funky, but you see them in IMSA and the 24 Hours of Le Mans and that. Yeah, I have one for the street. It's a GTS street car.
Yeah,
one of the best cars I've ever had. Right?
Yeah,
and it's a 2016, and it's every bit as fast as these race cars out on the track. But it's scary because you have no safety equipment in it, so you don't really want to drive it that fast.
Yeah,
it's really not built for that. I mean, the cars have gotten so good in performance that they're almost unsafe.
Have you seen Ferrari versus Ford?
Oh yeah, that's a great movie.
That scene where the race car driver brings in the CEO of Ford and takes him on a lap and just scares the shit out of him.
Yeah. We call that the brown zone.
Yeah. Until seeing that scene, because I have experiences in my life, I'm like, and people maybe tell me about my industry or something. I'm like, oh, you don't know how it really is. And then seeing that, I was like, I don't think I really know how racing really is.
No, it's different than you think. That scene was pretty good because it kind of gives you a sense. Like the first time I went out in a road race car with a professional driver, and it was a Miata of all things, and I thought, wow, I can't believe this car will actually do this.
Yeah.
It was just the proof of concept for me because I'm an engineer, right? And so, if it can do this, then it's an extension of what else can it do? And so what you saw in that movie with that scene was really how brutally fast those cars are. But they're also very unforgiving, so they have to be in the hands of somebody that really understands them. And it's not something that happens overnight, to learn how to drive these cars. There's some of it's talent, and a lot of it's just seat time. And so you get this sense that watching that, that it's a very frightening thing, and it's a very frightening thing because he wasn't expecting that. And I've taken people out on the track in my street cars, and taken them for drives, and they'll either have that reaction or they'll just get thrilled beyond thrilled, So
yeah.
So yeah, it's always fun to do that, actually.
Yeah. So what I've kind of followed you've talked about from high school that this is kind of your passion is racing. But going back to like when you were a kid, 6, 7, 8, 9, was racing or space in your mind, or was
space wasn't, racing was. Yeah.
We're just from watching TV, your dad, or that was just you?
The earliest pictures of me when I was a kid, when I was like 2 and 3 years old, I had a car right in front of me, right? And my grandparents used to take me to get the pictures because they were the only ones that had patience enough with me. And I had to have a car or I wouldn't let them take a picture of me.
Yeah.
And so I was just crazy about cars from the time I was born. I don't know why. And, it wasn't particularly that my family was into cars. They all liked cars, but nobody like me was into cars. And so, it was, getting the little plastic go-kart you can ride around, and then I started building soapbox derbies, and we lived on this hill in Southern California. It was it's an old chicken farm. And so we had this nice hill you could really get going fast and cheat death, so I started...
Dangerous hill.
It really was, actually, but here I am. I survived, 50 some odd years later.
Yeah.
But, I started stealing wheels off of the lawnmowers and things like that. And
I
drove my father crazy. My mother put up with it. But then that eventually got to the point where I found a go-kart and I bought it. And, actually my parents bought it for $20. And, got that running. And then I started driving them. Then I started racing them. And then, of course, this is like heroin. It just goes from little to big to bigger. And by the time I got done with that, I had one with a Suzuki 300cc motor in it. And we were just tearing things up. It was a shifter kart. And so it just went on from there, So cars have always been what sort of keep me motivated to stay healthy. I'm not as healthy as I'd like to be, but I'd probably be a lot less healthy if I didn't have to pass physicals every year to get in these things. And it's what's actually motivated me to do well in life so I can afford this.
Well, and also to race, too, you have to be aggressive.
Yeah.
Every year we do a fun thing with our firm, and one of the times we went go-kart racing. And just that level of focus and that aggression.
Focus.
But I heard you talk about an interview about the different culturals where maybe in France they have more aggression, where Americans have maybe more confidence. But it also has to be balanced too, because you can't have aggression so much that you're out of control. Do you think racing, and I'm just speculating, had that controlled aggression that translated over into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, it's very much like entrepreneurship. It's funny because the entrepreneurship came later, right? The racing came first.
Yeah.
The entrepreneurship came later. But in racing, there's a couple of things that are key. One is preparation. Here we are. We spend 40 minutes out on the racetrack today, but we spent a week preparing for this. And I've got Joe here who's checking the car out, and we know what to look for. And so you have to be prepared. You have to have everything. You have to have spares. There's a lot of preparation that goes into it that you don't realize until you do it. The second thing is you have to be prepared on the track to be lucky, right? So that's a balance of aggression, and it's a balance of knowing what lucky looks like, right? So if somebody spins in front of you, that can either be a disaster or a great opportunity. And yesterday we had a couple of cars, one spun and the other one spun right into them, and both of them totaled their cars.
Really?
That was bad, right?
Yeah.
So it takes that split-second judgment, just like an entrepreneur. Then the most important thing is you can't ever give up. When you think things are over, sometimes here they are, and just when you think you've won, things happen and you've lost it all.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that's very, very similar there in terms of the mentality and the spirit, and the aggression's a big part of it. So you have to be aggressive, but you have to have measured aggression.
Yep.
And it's like I was talking to you before we did this about driving this particular car. If you're overly aggressive, you're going to hurt yourself and everybody else with you, and so you just can't do that.
Yeah. I think that's key, because I think some people take business or leadership and they see aggression and they push it too far, because it's such a key characteristic. Yeah. It's also in sports too. I remember some of the best plays were after the coach yelled at me.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, I just blitzed and got a sack, even though it wasn't called because he just yelled at me. Yeah. But you can't be overly aggressive that you shoot yourself in the foot, or you shoot other people in the foot too.
Right.
So it's a fine line, and it just seems that racing kind of pairs with that, because you have to be in control of this massively powerful thing.
Yeah, your life's on the line, literally.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the other part that I don't say often, but I feel more alive out there in this race car cheating death than anything else I do in life.
Yeah.
It's an odd thing, and if I don't do it every now and then, I get really itched to go do it, and it's a terrible habit to have.
Yep. Well, it's not as, it's dangerous, but I don't know. At least you're not skydiving or anything like that. But
see, I don't like to do that.
Yeah. What are some exciting entrepreneurial projects? What's the most exciting entrepreneurial projects you've been on? Or was there a time in a particular project where you thought this was exciting or scary, or you're going off the rails and you had to pull it back?
Yeah, so I'll give you a couple of different kinds of examples. So still almost to this day, one of the best professional experiences I've ever had was very early in my career, when I was actually part of the French Space Agency, and we were building this Mars balloon, and the balloon itself would heat up during the day, and so it would go fly into the sky.
On Earth or
on
in
Mars.
theory on Mars?
Yeah. Okay. So we were building it so it would do this.
Yep.
So it would fly around Mars, and then at night, as the sun went down, it would cool and it'd come back down the surface. So there was this thing we call a snake that I invented, which is the reason I ended up at the French Space Agency. And it had a radar payload, and it drug along the ground, and it was constructed such that it wouldn't get stuck in the rocks. And it was kind of an accidental invention on our part. It was overlapping cones made of metal. And so we went over to France, and I helped them build that. And so we came back one summer to do the testing of a scaled flight model that would fly in the simulated night mode, near the surface on Earth, so that we could test the dynamics of the whole thing. And so we had this Russian, or they were Soviets back then, the Soviet group, because this was a Soviet mission to Mars. We had the French, who I worked for, and then we had the American crew, who was partly NASA, it was partly the Planetary Society. And so we went out, we had scouted ahead, and we went out and found the sand dunes and lava fields out in the California desert. And so we set up there, and I was on a chase crew to capture the balloon. So 5 miles uprange, or I guess it was closer to a mile uprange, they would release the balloon, and we would try to position ourselves to capture it. And we had these Caltech Suburbans, and there was like 4 of us, and I was in command of the capture team. And the wind was supposed to come towards us, and it went to the east of us, and so we had to reposition. And it was going fast, really fast. The wind just picked up and shifted. And here we are, flying out through the dunes, in these Suburbans, and catching air.
Yep.
And I had some of the Soviets in the back, high level guys, and they were laughing their ass off and saying "Oopla" every time we went over the top of the dunes. So you have moments like that you just never forget. It's like this. It's a lot like a race, that you've got this target, you're after something, you've got an accomplishment you're after. We did capture it, everything was great, The second thing was when Elon Musk, decided he wanted to build a rocket. That was like such a deep breath kind of thing where you just think, what are we? How can we do this? 20 years ago, that was insane to say we're going to build our rocket ourselves.
Yep.
And here we are, like 3 or 4 days away from him launching humans to the space station on this rocket that essentially is a descendant of what we worked on 20 years ago. So I didn't believe that would work, and that's why I left. I just couldn't see it working. And so there's a lot of faith in what we do in engineering in particular that sometimes you just don't have it, and that's the thing with Elon is if you're not with him 105% or 110%, then you better not be with him, right?
Yep.
Because life is miserable.
It's so interesting too because with Elon and some of these other people, you don't know what you can or cannot do until you do it, and you don't have. I mean, I'm sure you didn't have all the answers right away, right?
No.
You started helping him out, getting Space Cowboys together. I'm sure some of them were government, some were private.
Exactly.
Yeah. But it's just so interesting to see now that now is the time to try, and there are times to try.
Because it's always time to try.
Exactly.
Yeah, it always is.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's just Elon has stretched our sense of what we can accomplish, right?
Right.
And so you think about what he didn't found Tesla. He actually was a big investor. Martin Eberhard was the founder, but Elon's vision was to take it from what Martin, which was really a small electric car company that was boutique, to something that could compete with GM and Ford. And again, that was the other thing I thought, there's no way you do this, Elon. So his great contribution to us as a society is we can do these things.
Right. And the same thing with SpaceX. Obviously, he's very smart and very driven and has a keen sense of maybe what to do.
He does.
But the team that was helped put together by you and continued throughout this, you can't do it without the team. And the same thing with Steve Jobs.
Right.
Steve Jobs, obviously brilliant, obviously driven, obviously knew kind of the next thing to do again. But I remember, I read his book, Walter Isaacson, and in the movie, there's that famous scene where they go, Steve, what do you even do here? You don't program, you don't design, you don't code, you don't do shit. Because they're mad at him because, he was an a-hole some of the times.
Yeah.
And he's like,
those accusations leveled against me too.
Yeah. And he's like, I'm the conductor, but it does take that team.
It does.
To get it done.
Yeah.
And the possibilities are more open than they've ever been before.
Yeah, what you look for is what I call 2 + 2 = 8, right? So if you put two people together, is the sum of them together worth more or capable of more than them by themselves?
Yep.
And that's the magic that you start to look for. And that's the magic that's entrepreneurship. And that's the magic that Elon taps into. He's brilliant at that. And he's just like Steve Jobs. He's really, really, really harsh. Really harsh.
Yeah.
But it's hard to fault him because he's harsh in pursuit of a vision that he's very clear about, that he believes in to the point where he's all in. He's 100% in. It's like the joke about the chicken and the pig. The chicken is an observer of breakfast. The pig is all in for the bacon.
Yeah. Yep.
Right?
Yes.
Elon's all in on this stuff. If it goes down, he goes down, and that's what he'll tell you.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a certain amount of respect that goes with that, and people line up behind him, and they, they're like good soldiers and military. They put their lives in each other's hands.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, transitioning away from private, more into public.
Okay.
NASA. NASA kind of has new life. New directive.
A new administrator.
Do you like where they're going? Or let's say you were head of NASA. Would you change what they were doing? Like I would change some of the focus of what they're doing, but I want your perspective.
Wow, that's a really great question. So I know Jim Bridenstine, the head NASA administrator, really well, and I consider him a friend.
Yep.
I wouldn't want his job, honestly, because
if you could do it without all the pressure.
That's kind of like saying, if you could fly without any of the weight of the aluminum to weigh you down. Okay, that's an easy answer, but the real answer is that this is a job that has a balance of power. He's sitting at all these different forces that are mostly political and some economic that are forcing him into things that are completely counter to what NASA should be doing. So I interviewed for the number 2 slot there in the human space flight, And within 5 minutes, it was pretty clear to me that I didn't want the job. And within 10 minutes, when they asked me what I thought of some of their keystone programs, it was pretty clear they didn't want me in there. So it was really an eye-opener for me that NASA at the highest levels of leadership has to deal more with the politics and the policy of, jobs in Alabama, jobs in Maryland, jobs in California, rather than what's the right mission for NASA. Now, that aside, so if I were the NASA administrator, despite all the politics, I would make NASA more mission focused, and I think that's where they're becoming, and I think that's what Jim Bridenstine's doing. So he's saying, look, our mission is to explore the moon. Our mission is to explore the solar system. Our mission is to put humans into space and do things that nobody's done. And eventually our mission is to put humans on Mars. Now, private sector may beat him to all that stuff, but he's not saying our mission is to build the biggest, baddest rockets in the world, which is, in some people's eyes, the thing that NASA should be doing. And so for the longest time, NASA has tried to compete with the private sector because in the early days, nobody could do what NASA did, so they did it. But that went on over decades and created really an industry of NASA that was very inefficient. So I like to say, if NASA, the classic NASA, if it could create an iPhone and use them for their own use, they do it, right? Because it kept them busy and it was interesting. So I think the same is true of like Defense Department as well. It's about mission focus, right? And defense is much better at that than NASA. NASA, I think, could learn a lot from the defense side of saying, here's our mission and here's what we ought to be doing, and let's not think about spending our scarce resources on stuff that other people can do. SpaceX, for example, took $750 million under the COTS program, and they created the Falcon 9 and the Dragon capsule with that. Okay, and that was creating resupply the space station. NASA tried to do the same thing with the program they had. They spent $50 billion on. You got a 50x efficiency on use of capital there. That's a big duh, right?
Yeah.
We should be doing more and more of that. And this is precisely the point I was making when I interviewed for this job, where the air in the room just went out. The oxygen in the room just went out.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, I'm done.
Well, would you change or add some missions? For examples,
Of course.
One thing that maybe I think about is it's hard to do nuclear development because it's national security. Well, NASA could be doing that in space easier than any, you, right?
Well, yeah, nobody in the private sector is going to do nuclear propulsion.
Right.
So this is a perfect thing for NASA to do.
Yeah.
You want the government agencies to do the things that the private sector has no inherent incentive of doing, right? Or you want the private sector to do things that they're inherently more efficient at, right?
Yep.
So that's what I call the public-private partnership. And so the mission is always that thing that there's no inherent public commercial incentive to do. So there's no inherent reason for commercial space to go out and look at Jupiter and take pictures.
Right.
There's no market for it, right?
Yeah.
But there is a market for moving bits around the Earth for commercial purposes, if you want to watch TV or listen to the radio through satellite and so on. So that's obviously not a NASA kind of job either. So that there's a very obvious split there, and there's a lot of things that I would like to see NASA be more aggressive on in terms of technology, in terms of how the mission plays out. A little more aggressive on going to Mars. In a way, it's kind of a shame if Elon Musk and SpaceX end up at Mars before NASA does. But
which is probably likely.
It's very likely.
Extremely.
I think it's extremely likely.
Yep.
So that's kind of tells you where our space agency has gotten to, through no fault of Jim's, for example. I mean, it's evolved. It's a creature of politics and money that creates this present situation we have.
Yeah, and I think Jim in himself, besides the moon mission, just the way he conducts himself and on Twitter has just kind of livened up the whole community as well.
Yeah.
I've just noticed that there's a little intangible that you don't, and he has it.
He's a surprising guy. So he's very very calm, quiet. When you meet him, you might say this guy's a real nerd, right?
Sure,
And,
he works for NASA.
Well, right. I mean, he was a Navy pilot when I first met him, and then he was a congressman, from Oklahoma, and that's how I got to know him when he was a congressman from Oklahoma. And he's very interested in a lot of technical things. He flew rocket-powered airplanes for a while for Rocket Racing League, but he's been extremely good as the NASA administrator. He doesn't get political, and he was accused of being very political because he took what I consider a libertarian stance on NASA should buy data from the private sector, and even some of the Republicans didn't like that. So he thought that made a lot of sense. But he's not turned out to be that political administrator. He's turned out to be a very effective guy who is not even a technocrat. He really blends the politics with the technology extraordinarily well. It surprised even me.
Yeah. Are there any things in the private space sector that you think that you're excited that they're doing, that they're tackling besides SpaceX, or that you see opportunities that someone should maybe work on trying to solve?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So you go back to the military and, the mission of the military. We're living in a constantly evolving world. And what you find if you've dealt with the military for very long in space is we're always fighting the last battle. All right, we're trying to develop new systems that would make our last war
easier,
better. Yeah, the outcome would be better. So what the commercial guys seem to be better at is not necessarily anticipating the evolution of the force, but creating the technology that addresses the mission quicker. And so what I'm starting to see there's a company I'm working with right now in Michigan called R2 Space, where they're actually doing commercial-based imagery and surveillance for the military, basically creating the assets and leasing them back to the military, so that the parts of the military that aren't traditionally able to access that kind of data because it's considered national technical means, highly classified and so forth, these are targeted at their tactical needs, and they get it done for a tenth of the cost.
Right.
So that kind of future, I think, is going to be very, very big in the military. That the commercial space is saying, hey, we can do this, and we can be creative in how we finance it. And it's a good deal for the taxpayer because we as taxpayers don't have to pay as much, and we get the military focused on what they should be doing, which is defending the nation.
Yeah, and that almost kind of brings us back to our conversation before on these people like Musk and Jobs that can focus to, hey, we're going to do this one thing. We're going to make this one computer this way. Sometimes when you work with the government, I used to be in the military, and I work with city planning officials all the time.
So you get it.
Everyone has their opinion.
Right.
And to solve everyone's opinion, make something crappy.
Right.
Where the private sector can say, we're solving this one extremely well, be nimble. They've done it with the Pentagon, the computer system that now links the FBI. They tried doing it for, I want to say 150 million, but it was probably billion.
Right.
And then a small agile group did it for, a tenth of the price.
Right.
Too many rules, regulations that, what's the saying? The way to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Yes.
Yeah. So as space will become more and more private just because they're going to be agile and these things, like you're saying, are going to happen.
Well, there's economic reasons to be there.
Yeah. So what would a space government untethered from Earth look like in function?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's one of the things I talked to the Libertarian Convention about is, what happens when mankind ventures out off the Earth. So it brings about this basic question of, what inherent rights do governments have? And if I don't want to become political because I'm not a terribly political person.
Right.
I'm all about liberty and individual liberty because I'm an entrepreneur. But if you start to think about, and it's very valid with this COVID thing going on right now, is the government at the service of the people, or is it something that's there to govern the people? And it's a fundamental split whether or not you're on one side or the other. And so you start to entertain arguments about, what would a government on Mars look like, and where would you derive that basic logic of why there ought to be a government on Mars? We're here at a racetrack right now. What we're doing is very deadly, okay? And people could get hurt. They do get hurt. We probably lose a dozen people a year out of the sport. Not a lot, but it's an assumed risk that we all take. We have our own rules. We enforce them. We don't have any government body that gets involved in this. So there's no reason for the government necessarily to get involved in risky things.
Right.
We can self-regulate it. So yeah, a space community, I think, becomes a libertarian community. It becomes like racing, that you have rules. You have to have rules. You have people together. You have to have rules. So, but the rules are much more democratic in the traditional sense of the Greek democracy than a lot what we see right today on Earth.
Yeah. What's your opinion of Space Force? And I'll ask why. Because when it originally came out, I was actually like, no. Really against it, because I thought this is just a way for them to impose more rules. Once whoever makes whatever up there and people start going up there, now you're going to have to pay a space safety tax, and I'm just extrapolating.
Right.
I'm excited for the new Netflix series, Space Force. I think that will be funny. But what is your opinion of this new development?
Good question. So first time I was asked that was on national TV, and I just said, well, I'm against it, because I'm a small government person.
Yeah.
And it was already being, space defense is an obvious need. It's a mission area that needs to be addressed. And it's being addressed by the Air Force. And I didn't see why creating another branch of the military made sense. So like you, however, seeing how it's evolved, it's become an opportunity to actually rebirth a lot of the things that the Air Force has done poorly. And so in that sense, if it's used to reform government and government acquisition, I'm actually for it.
I know. My mind has kind of changed.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Me too. And I took all the lumps. I took a lot of lumps from the Trump administration over it. But, I still stand by the basic idea. We don't need it. But if we're going to reform government with it, I'm supportive.
It's easier to do it starting anew.
It is.
Yep.
Yeah.
Than going again. If you could give a piece of advice to your 20-year-old self, what would you say?
Don't marry that woman would be the first one. And then the second one would be, have more faith in yourself.
Yep.
So, a lot of times we don't, especially when we're young, right? We don't have the experience to know that we can actually do these things. Mm-hmm. And it always looks scarier than it really is. And so for me personally, I always thought I was pretty brave, but I really wasn't. As I've gotten older, I've gotten a lot more analytical and a lot more comfortable with going out onto uncomfortable areas. So I think that's probably true of a lot of people. I know my own children. I have 6 children, believe it or not, and all of them suffer from the same thing, And I keep telling them, believe in yourself. You got to believe in yourself. That's the thing they need. I have this professor that has found me on Facebook from college, and he's a math professor, and it was a low point in my math career. My college career.
Yep.
And he just kept telling me, I know you can do it. I remember him. Lance Littlejohn, you can do it. You can do it. And it made a hell of a difference to me. And it's that voice that we've got to give our young people. Is look, have faith in yourself. You can do it.
Yeah.
Don't be scared away. The worst you can do is give up.
The same thing happened in college. In my second year, I actually thought I was pretty good at architecture. I was never overly cocky, but they posted the grades, and I loved it because they posted them just on the wall, and I was the second to last. And I go,
that hurts.
Yep. I go, I must be terrible. And Professor Sydney Ernest, who I love and still know her, she's like, no, you're not terrible. You're not bad. I was like, I feel like I'm terrible.
But you're the top 5% of the population, right?
Right.
Yet you're last in that. It's like being out on the racetrack here.
Yep.
Being last in this group is not bad.
Yeah. And I ended up at the end winning. So every architecture school, there's an Alpha Chi Rho award that goes to the best student that has the most promise.
Yeah.
So I got that in the end, right?
Yeah.
But in the beginning,
good for you.
Yeah.
Good for you.
I have 2 quotes because I think they're pertinent to what you just said, and I wonder if you agree with them or want to elaborate. One is from Alan Key, and he said, Jeff Bezos likes to say this: a change in perspective is worth 80 IQ points. And then this one's unattributed, but I've heard it a couple times. Effort is worth 20 IQ points.
It's probably true.
So the perspective on a problem and your attitude and effort towards it counts for a lot. Is
perspective really is. One of the things I like to do is take long drives across the country because my thought process opens up and my perspective changes. And traveling around the world, you see the different way people live. It changes your perspective about things. And when you go to solve a problem, you just have more tools in the toolbox is what it amounts to. No, I think the quote's quite right on.
Awesome. Well, I think we'll end it there. Anything you want to leave people with? Any place to come follow you or anything you want to shout out?
So
I'll let you wrap it up.
Follow me on Twitter, James N. Cantrell. And again, I promise not to be political because I'm not. And then jimcantrell.com is just my site about what I'm doing. I hope to finish my book here this year.
Awesome. I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, called Breaking All the Rules. So it talks a lot about what we've talked about here today.
When is that going to come out?
So I was supposed to get it done about right now, but
but you had to do this interview, so
yeah, right. This interview put me off. Yeah. No, it's life gets in the way, but I started a new company and so on, and so the book's about 3/4 done. So I've got to find an editor for it, and I'm anxious to get it out the door.
Can you talk about this new company, or is it still? Yeah,
sure.
Tell us about it.
Phantom Space. So started this. I left Vector in August of 2019 and spent about 3 weeks in my swimming pool just sort of getting perspective.
Yep.
And thinking about things that went wrong, things that worked, things that didn't work. And, I still was left with this idea that, the transportation system into space is really lacking, right? Mm-hmm. And so I got together with one of the guys that I've worked with a long time, Mike D'Angelo, and we decided basically we wanted to be in business together, first and foremost, and that we thought about of all the things that we've learned, what would make sense, and so we were left with this sense that there was a lot of learning that we had both had from Vector that we needed to take forward into a new company. So we're focused on building the infrastructure for space, kind of like, if you will, it'd be similar to what Cisco does for the internet. We're doing for space transportation. So it's not just rockets, but it's all about satellites, and it's all about in-space propulsion and so forth. And so we're already cash flow positive. We got a large satellite contract. We got about 4 more that are coming along, and we've just closed a round of financing so that we can start down some of our bigger projects. So we're going to try to be quiet about it because we'd rather do than say. So So just keep your eye out, and hopefully it will be something that is successful.
It's interesting. I'm interested in following it because the more you know about technology, the more you realize how deep it is and how it takes so much to run these systems. And if you're tackling that in space, I'm sure there's going to be an equal expansion in the amount of behind the scenes. If I'm interpreting this correctly, the behind the scenes infrastructure and connection that needs to happen.
Yeah, it's immense. It's immense.
To make it so easy that we can just, complain that our iPhone is slow when really like you're texting 4,000 miles, and it took.
Right. And so the way I see the space transportation system today is much the way the automotive industry was 100 years ago. There were a lot of players 100 years ago in the automotive industry. They ended up being, maybe 5, 6, 7 major companies in the world that built cars. The same is true in space systems. And right now we're in that period where there's a lot of creativity. There will be a shakeout. Obviously, SpaceX has become one of they're sort of the General Motors of that world. And so one of the things that is behind all these things is the fundamental technology. And I think the mistake everybody's been making in the new space business is focusing on building a new company with all this new technology. And really, it's hard enough to build a company and get it cash flow positive and build the team and keep everybody happy. You want to really complicate your life and throw in 10 technology problems you can't solve that are very expensive to solve. You've got a real problem on your hands. So we've taken a different approach to this, and we bought some technology, we've licensed some technology, and so that's the approach we're going to take. And over time, we'll develop some of that internally. But we just like the services we want to provide to the rest of the industry, it's something that you build upon. It's like a pyramid, And ultimately, the use case of how somebody's making money with the consumer is at the top of that pyramid. We still think that the bottom of the pyramid is still being built.
I agree. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for taking the time.
My pleasure.
I'm sure everyone appreciates it.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, don't forget to leave us a 5-star review on the iTunes app. Tip your barista, and we'll see you next week for more Monday Morning Coffee with Inside the Firm.